Okay, cool. So my name is Graham. I grew up in South Africa as a kid. Um, did a lot of software development and stuff when I was in my teenage years. I went to high school that luckily had a laptop program. So I got started building apps in Java and JavaScript at the time, for like early versions of those, PHP, Python, Django, those kinds of things. I had some pretty cool like blogging platforms and stuff that I built when I was like 18 that were recognized by like the Google engineering team. This is really early. I'm a little bit older, so like this is like maybe like 2004, 2005, 2006 era. Where like I went to college in the United States. While I was there, I started a little startup that allowed bloggers to put a subscription form on their website and just like get a list of subscribers. And that was pretty successful at like 23 million users or something. And so, yeah, I sold that company for very little. I didn't like raise for the company or anything, which I think I would have done if I'd gone to like Stanford, but I was at a liberal arts college in the Midwest. So after that, I was able to like, afford college, and it was great to like have that as a little bit of like, it's a financial like safety net for me. To college, worked for an education tech company for 4 years. And then a friend of mine from high school in South Africa was founding a company called Numerai, which is sort of crypto enabled prediction market with stocks. I consulted there for a little bit and sort of got pulled on Ethereum. Thought it was quite interesting. There were like no tokens on Ethereum at the time. I think Olga was the only one had already launched, which is a very complicated prediction market, and Numerai had the Numerai token. So around that time, I was sort of looking at crypto companies to join, and one big idea, it wasn't called DeFi at the time because nobody had come up with that term, but it was sort of like you could do this like financial things that were like encode all of the primitives on chain and like send them permissionlessly. So joined the founding team of this company called Dharma. We were working on a lending and borrowing protocol. And eventually, sort of like the winning model ended up being a pooled model like Compound, and we shifted more to trading side. Uniswap launched in 2018, and so we ended up, or 2018, 2019 time. And we started pivoting into trading on top of Uniswap. And so I prototyped a little app that allowed you to onboard with a debit card and just start buying any token that was on Uniswap. Like as soon as it hit the Uniswap factory, we would add it to the app and then get traded. And the benefit of that over something like Coinbase was that suddenly you could trade any token and onboard really easily. Whereas, Coinbase had this listing process that they'd only have like 20 tokens at the time that you could trade. So that was really cool.
What was it? Sorry to interrupt, but what was it doing versus like Uniswap direct, like trading on Uniswap directly?
Yeah, so it was the mobile app, which was, one benefit,
Got it.
Uniswap, this was like Uniswap V2, right? So like,
Yeah.
they had a website and it said launch app, and you clicked a button, it would take you to app.uniswap.org. And then you could swap tokens. So basically you could take like ETH, maybe have for like into another token. And there were so few tokens at the time. It was like, maybe you could buy DAI, SDC wasn't really a thing. Even it was like just starting to get traction. But then that coincided with DeFi summer. So Compound launched their token, and so now you could buy Comp token. And then there were all of these different farming protocols that sort of spun up around Compound, and so they were literally like farming themed tokens. So it was like Yam. And you could buy these things. People started building out some pretty sophisticated products that would have tokens. And that was what we call like DeFi summer period. And a lot of the trading actually happened on Dharma because people who were very new to crypto, they didn't have anywhere to go to buy these tokens. You couldn't buy them on Coinbase. And so you could just download this app Dharma. You could enter in your bank details. We connected to the bank account. You could send wires through, I think we accepted like $20,000 wires, or you could use debit card, and you could just buy, Yam token or whatever the flavor of the the week was during DeFi summer. And that was really cool and exciting. So that led to pretty well its product. Once I'd kind of seen that come to fruition, it was, I'm simplifying all of this because it was like over, a couple of months, but that was a lot to like kind of go through and build all that stuff out. And I felt like I was at the end of my period of like being in like the finance part of crypto, and I wanted to do something like a little bit more cultural. So I started exploring some things. I contracted a designer who was kind of new into the space. It was people pleaser to like make an NFT. That was like an avatar. And I had this idea of like making some kind of metaverse game on top of Arweave, where you could have these NFTs. And I started realizing, okay, maybe NFTs will be a thing. Yeah. And so, through working with Arweave, I met, somebody named Dennis, who was also interested in building a kind of like Twitter on top of Arweave. So Arweave is a decentralized storage like system, still is, obviously. And we kind of like, we're jamming on these ideas, and I was like, thinking about my thing. He was thinking about his thing. Another idea that I had at the time was like Kickstarter. Like if you can do Kickstarter on Ethereum natively, it would be pretty cool, like fundraising. So we decided to actually work together. And so we started building out this product called Mirror.xyz, which was a publishing platform. And we decided to take like blogging as the form and then add in economic blocks into the blogs. So the form of this today is kind of like frames on top of Blockbuster, but our version of it was blog posts where you could like embed a role, so plug in, and the plugin could be a crowdfunding plugin or it could be an NFT auction. And I also really wanted to do tipping. So I thought it'd be great if somebody wrote a good blog post and just kind of tip the author. But it was so expensive because you only had Ethereum L1 at the time. So sometimes it would be like $10 for the transaction fee to tip. So it wasn't really going to work on that model, but the L2s were coming out. And so I was looking at like ZK Sync and stuff. And then eventually, some more legitimate L2s were coming out, like Optimism. And so we eventually added this idea of like, what if you could tip, but then you also got something in return for tipping, which was like, you actually get an NFT of the post. So we kind of called that like collecting and came up with this expression, like, collect this thing you like. And then instead of liking the blog post, you would kind of mint it. And Optimism launched, and their first like blog post with like the launch details was a blog post on Mirror where you could collect it. And I think in like 1 hour, there's 250,000 collects or something like this. It was like huge. Usually sticked up going like Optimism worked perfectly. But it was like super interesting because it was like, okay, this already proved out the model of being able to collect something on an L2 for very cheap. You get something, but then also the author like got something in return. So yeah, in total, I worked on Mirror for like 2 years. That was a very interesting time, obviously, because NFTs really did break out, and like the narrative really shifted, and crypto was in this very positive light for a while. During that time, I founded something called Crypto Culture and Society, which was sort of like a little group for people to discuss crypto and like how it intersected with art and other parts. It was kind of like a sociological like study group in a way, focused on crypto. And I did a crowdfund for it on Mirror. And then people could join if they like had one of the tokens crowdfund. They could like get exclusive access to an instructor who would like do a video conversation. So we had, founders of various like protocols come on and like do a little presentation on a Zoom call, and people would like ask them questions if they were like one of the the funders of the crowdfund, and if they could like review the materials like later. And I think like there were probably like 5,000 people who were like in that group at the time. Like crypto was very popular, 2021, 2022. So that was like super interesting. And then over time, Dennis and I like started seeing things a little bit differently in terms of like where the product should go, and like just like the publishing platform, and he was interested in other things. So we decided to part ways, and I was trying to think of like, okay, what am I going to do next? So I wanted to stay in crypto, but so I was planning out like my next steps, and started thinking a lot about like on-chain reputation. And then, and I'm at the Coinbase Venture Summit. And at that time, my idea was really around like, if we could create like point systems for people building crypto products, then the point systems could be used later for like distributing tokens. Like that seems to align pretty well because oftentimes people do these retroactive airdrops, but they're very like spontaneous and people complain about them because they didn't know like what factored into them at the time. And if you do like a sort of points loyalty system, maybe that's a better approach. So we built that out, and that's been working pretty well. I think we've assigned points for something like 20 million wallets or something. It's like pretty insane. I think like there's probably like 1 million point assignments that are happening like every hour, and it's just all kinds of various projects. One that this community would know quite well, like Kubrick's, Blueprint, Min Podcast, the album, things like that. They're pretty prominent, and then just a lot of ones that like are less visible. They're just using us in the background. And then you can claim tokens based on like the coin balance. So we did some forecasted frames, and I think we've done like a couple 100,000 transactions on various chains where people are claiming rewards based on like their points. So it's quite similar to like building like an on-chain loyalty like protocol. And then we were reached out to by Base and Atari to work on basically a game for Atari. So that was like a couple months ago. We did Onchain Arcade, which allowed you to play these Atari classic games, where the points would be like on this like Web3 point system, and all of our points go into an L3 that rolls up to Base. And so it's like on-chain point system. And then you could issue like, I think probably like 2 million people were like checking it out. And I think 20,000 or so people minted the game and played it. So that was quite fun. Around that time, we were thinking a lot about like, it would be cool to kind of bet on who's going to be at the top of the leaderboard. And so that could get us like sort of like the latest iteration of where we're at, which is, basically testing out a kind of like marketplace, like where we do reputation, but we make it like market-based reputation. And we just compare the performance of that versus doing like a point system reputation. And that's pretty much like my story so far. So I've monologued a little bit, but
I've been invested in like, Bitcoin and Ethereum for a while, but I wasn't like deep in like DeFi summer or anything. So the fact that I'm not familiar with, like, I know Compound, I'm not familiar with Dharma, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't like super big. And I understood after asking about the difference between like with just trading on Uniswap, I didn't realize on the first pass that it was also serving as like sort of the fiat on-ramp, which obviously like Uniswap was not doing. And so that's, better than Coinbase because it listed a bunch of tokens, and better than Uniswap in that it was available on mobile and it was the fiat on-ramp. So very easy for people to just come in and buy all these tokens. But yeah, it was interesting that you came full circle after that back to a blogging platform. And I feel like even now you're definitely operating more in the sort of like creators world. Certainly like with a lot of writers on the platform I've seen. Is the way with that so this, I don't know if you mentioned it in the intro, but the platform we're talking about here, the protocol we're talking about is stack.so. And is the way that it works, like you mentioned, I think 20 million wallets with points. Is this like purely permissionless point, like sort of, giving of points or tracking of points, or is it permissioned on the side of the platforms, like whether it's, a pods or whatever it might be? Because 20 million, like I'm assuming it's not permissioned on the user side, but it's either the platforms that are opting in to be a part of this point system with their users, or it's just completely permissionless.
So, we started just working with these little like brands, and like, I won't call out like which one specifically, but like we started working with people, and then they would have a community of like, say like 20,000 like wallets that were active.
Right.
And they wanted to say, okay, if you minted this thing on Ethereum L1 like 2 years ago, and you minted this thing on Optimism 1 year ago, and you minted this thing on Cyber Chain like yesterday, I want to kind of aggregate that and create a loyalty program for all of the wallets that are connected. So they would use our tool to kind of index all of that activity on chain. And then see all of the data in an admin view. So they can see a chart of like all of their activity as it happens every day. That gives them like a really good way to like assess how they're doing. They can issue points to the users. The users can see that either on their website or on the leaderboard that we create. And then they can issue rewards. So they can say, I'm going to like give an NFT or give an ERC20 to anybody who is like in this point system according to like traditional like loyalty. It's permissionless in the sense that anybody can go and create a point system and assign points to some user. Which, you know, I think that that's like a pretty normal, like good thing. And like, there wouldn't be any way ready to make that permission because it's based on activity. So somebody would just say like, this is, maybe you're like a holder of Azuki and then you want to make a leaderboard of like all the top Azuki holders. In a lot of ways, it's the first time people ever already seen a view of everybody who's in those communities aggregated across all of the different chains and activities, projects that a certain brand has done. So it's nice way to go and to look at that. And you can see that like in Farcaster, because we're talking about, you know, with the Farcaster community, like when you look at the leaderboard of the top like Farcaster, you know, participants for like the rewards system, it's nice to kind of just see that view of like who are the top 100 creators on Warpcast or whatever. If you were to about the people in the community and like see who's kind of trending and who's doing interesting things, people were basically using the leaderboards for that purpose. So
these people may or may not be aware of Stack. Like there's no need for them to be, as long as they're just doing what they're doing on chain. You're aggregating these leaderboards and updating these leaderboards, and they might be, you know, top 10 on a few of them without even knowing it, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And there's like, it's something like 10 to 20,000 of these like leaderboards that people are creating. And some of them are very serious and some of them are less serious, right? So sometimes people are just trying to just kind of like test out the product. And so they create a leaderboard and they're like, I'm going to add all of my Farcaster followers to the leaderboard. And then if they think of this NFT, they engage with the role points. And then sometimes they use an SDK and they say like, if they played add points to their, you know, to their tally through Stack through an SDK and like a really nice like Web2 like SDK that's pretty easy to use. So I kind of just like created all of these like set of profiles. And then because like the turnaround time and some of the larger brands can take some time, like we did sort of adding some more consumer features. So we actually added like a really nice looking leaderboard that people can use out the box. So they don't have to like build a leaderboard on their like website themselves. They can just use one that we have out of the box. And we started noticing that people would spend a lot of time there. So people would come to the website. You know, we were just getting a couple thousand people coming to Stack every day to like look at the different leaderboards. And they would spend on average 5 minutes like on the site, and the bounce rate was under 40%. So Web2 engagement metrics, like that's pretty good. That kind of means that like people are interested in like exploring the leaderboard. So we also added profiles for users. And when we add the profile, we enrich it with data that we can find from like Warpcast and things like that, like Lens Protocol and the CNS and things like that, just so people can like understand who's like on the leaderboard. And the creators can also understand like who their top fans are and like, you know, find those people on chain and go and find their profiles and reach out to them, things like that. And as they added more of these consumer features, we just found that we had just more people spending time like on the to like add some more features that were, you know, just for people who wanted to connect with others. And so we allow people to sort of like post on their profile and see like, maybe you want to like show that you're like engaged with this. So you can like upload a photo or things.
So is the intention for you guys like to be a place where regular people in crypto will go to like look at all of these leaderboards and their points and whatnot? Or is it like originally, like now I'm starting to think maybe that's more of the intention, but originally I was thinking it was something that was more for like various projects to, sort of customize and configure these point systems based on on-chain activities so that they can do airdrops or whatever else it might be. Or is
Yeah,
it goal?
it was originally the latter, where we really just wanted to be sort of like more of like a SaaS tool. I had never really built a SaaS like product before. Like everything I've built has been in consumer for like the last like 10 years, 15 years or
Right.
so. And so I was building out this like SaaS product. The market in crypto is pretty small, right? So like you do kind of like hit a cap where like, okay, like maybe you have like doodles like using the point system, and it's like, okay, now just to go and like get more and more and more of these like friends projects, and it can take time to kind of like, build that pipeline out.
Right.
So we ended up just like adding some more like consumer features, and people seem to like it and engage with that. So that gets us to today, where I think we're just at a point where it's organically evolving and like into something a little different, from just like a pure like kind of SaaS tool for point systems. And we have a nice little community, and they're kind of engaging. We had this market feature. So the impetus for that was looking at something like the on-chain arcade. We thought, wouldn't it be great if you could kind of like have a prediction market around like who's going to be at the top of the leaderboard? So it was like at the end of the year, and like we were kind of like packing up and that we're like going on vacation, and we came up with this like protocol where we would just say like, let's think about it like Polymarket or something, where we can just like have a token for any like address, and you can like, stake on it, like make some kind of bet. So we made this protocol, and on Christmas morning at like 2 a.m. I like rolled out a little feature that just had a buy button. And then I noticed that people were like using that. So people would come from the leaderboards. So remember, there's like quite a lot of traffic coming to the leaderboards, and then they would like find this other feature. So people started buying, and then I just noticed like every hour, like people were buying like some accounts. And it was pretty random. Like people were just testing out buying their own account. Maybe, and then every now and then you'd see somebody would like buy Vitalik's account, and it was kind of like weird. And I was just kind of like left it. This was like Christmas, New Year period. And then it just sort of like ticking up a little bit more. And then sort of like a week or two later, there were these other projects that were launching on Solana that were actually kind of really going into the like sort of, I call it like me coin as opposed to meme coin, which is like tokens around accounts. And I was like, okay, well, that's kind of interesting. I don't think I'd want to do something like what Cloud is doing, where you're trying to launch celebrities. I think there's like kind of like a lot of problems with that model. Like I could go into it. Like, I think the game theory is really bad. I think people are going to like lose money trading those things. I think all of the charts are going to look the same. They're basically going to have this like bump, and then it's going to die. And then they were going to move on to the next one and do the same thing. So like the mechanics and like the, visually the chart is going to look the same for every single token that gets launched on that platform. The approach that we took on the protocol, what it does is basically says it pre-allocates 30% of the tokens to the account itself. So if any account gets bought, then it starts stripping sort of on like a vesting schedule, like 30%, which is triggered on every trade. And it gives 1% of the trade value to the profile and 1% of the goal, and then 30% of the tokens always. And so like, yeah, we just put that out over Christmas, and then Cloud launched, and then a lot of people were very disillusioned with Cloud, and like a lot of things just broke in the app, and they were on Solana, and they had all these like professional, pumped up, fun, investors kind of like figure out the system and just snipe everybody. So the mechanisms like didn't work very well. And so people started mentioning us in comments as like a comparison. And then we started seeing a lot of people from Solana basically just come try out our app. And I think very unexpectedly, over like a 2-hour period, there was like $4 or $5 million being traded on stock through this market, which is super interesting. And like, it wasn't something where people were able to like pump and dump. It just didn't have the same like ability to really do that. And then the underlying accounts were like earning quite a lot of like fees of it. So some people would just make like $1,000 like during this period, and then they would also get 30% of their tokens, which just ended up being quite a lot. And yeah, so you could basically just buy like any address. So I didn't know. It was very unexpected. Like I didn't think that would happen. Like when like Christmas morning, I was like, okay, like let's see if people would use this feature. So after that, like I had to do a lot of thinking around like, okay, what should this be? What could this be? What should it not be? And so like we're in the process of kind of figuring out like, where we're going to take this, to be honest. I think I'm not a huge fan of people just buying like random accounts that are like not going to know about this product. I think it should be the case where like people who are actually using Stack for something, like if they're a creator on the platform and they're like uploading things and engaging, then I think it's a really interesting idea to have creators have like sort of profile tokens that people buy. We'll have to figure out the mechanics of it, but that's kind of like where we're at the moment. It's pretty exciting, but there's still like a lot to figure out. So I'll just copy out. Yeah, it's like it's been like 2 or 3 weeks of like this already being a thing. So
yeah, no, I know it's sort of right in the middle of things, and it's cool to be able to talk to you during this sort of inflection point time or transition time. And I appreciate the transparency around like, you don't know exactly what you guys are going to do with it yet, but obviously you've got, some ideas and some experiments that you've run so far. One thing that I'm curious about is like you mentioned earlier, well, I'll just sort of preface by saying that this concept of, coins attached to individuals is, I think you call them me coins. It's kind of interesting. I haven't heard that one before, but it's good. It's just meme coins, drop a couple characters, don't need to add anything. So I think this idea after, there was BitClout and then there was FriendTech, and now, there's been a few others, namely on Solana, like you mentioned, Clout, and what's that other one? Blanking on the name. The guy's on Farcaster. I forget what it's called. Bill Zhang or something like that. I forget the name of the product, but like anytime I see one of these, I experiment because I think it's one of these things that after those 3, 4, however many experiments, especially BitClout and FriendTech, I feel like, which were, very popular for a very short period of time. The idea sort of has like a very harsh stigma attached to it. Especially with, people outside of crypto probably haven't even, played with these things yet. They might have some sort of stigma against personal coins or whatever you want to call them from more of like the, big celeb coins, whether it's Trump or, Portnoy or, Hawktua, whatever. They might have a stigma from those, but they maybe haven't played with like the platforms yet. But people who are in crypto, I think there's this idea. It's like, oh, here goes another one. And this idea like sucks. Like this idea is a pump and dump. And I personally like don't agree with that. I think that this idea has like so much room to run. And it just hasn't been done exactly right. Wildcard was another one actually that launched on Farcaster that I just remembered. So there's been like several of these. And the pattern tends to be that they do well to some degree, whether it's like huge or, modest, and then they crash and then they're done. I don't know. I personally believe that just because that's happened several times, like that's not inevitable for this category of product. And maybe the thing that ultimately works will be sort of sufficiently different from whatever these have all had in common. But from that lens, like I'm curious, like, you said that with Clout's model, for example, you thought that was sort of like doomed to fail if they're going after, celebrity coins and whatnot, and maybe some way that they're, however they actually have like the mechanics working. So I'm curious to actually get into the like sort of details of why the way that they did it is, could never work from your perspective, and how Stack works so that, from your perspective, even though, you guys obviously don't know exactly what it's going to be yet, it seems like you already built it in a way that you felt like prevented sort of the pump and dump from getting out of control, like sort of flatten the curve to some degree. So I'm curious to hear the compare and contrast there.
For sure. Yeah. And just to compare and contrast, like FriendTech, as you mentioned, was kind of like probably like the first like real one. I very much discount like Big Cloud. Like I know it was like it was a big thing, but I didn't get into it. I remember Balaji talking about it, and then there was like a lot of pushback. And on the point of pushback, I think the pushback is very valid. I think there's probably a good reason why in the history of like humankind, like you haven't really had like a stock market for people or anything like that. It probably is like good reasons why, on the face of it, it's like not a good idea. There's probably like a lot, so we should be very cautious when we approach the topic. That said, there's potential for something adjacent to this idea. And I think it's probably not like, it's probably not like this on the nose, like I'm speculating on like, this like celebrity through a meme coin. Probably like not as direct as that, but there's probably something that's like adjacent to it that makes sense. And I think that's like kind of like you and I probably would agree on that. So looking at FriendTech, I wrote an article, like a review on FriendTech the week that it launched. I was very interested in what they were doing. I know I was trying to be very balanced in that article, and I referenced the fact that people were very polarized about it. So on one hand, you had people that I really respected calling out that it was, it was a progressive web app. It wasn't a real like Apple app. So they called it like a buggy side-loaded like app with all these like dark patterns and stuff like that. It was also the people on the other side saying, bullish people having fun on chain, like this is just a new thing. This is in the depth of the bear market, like 2022. There was nothing going on in crypto, like to speak of already. Like people were bickering like a lot of the time. They were bickering about like the FTX scandal and like calling each other out about these things. There just wasn't like a lot of positivity. And then you saw this new app come on, and people were very polarized. Like some people thought it was just fun. Other people didn't like that it introduced all these like new patterns that were different. But let me just go to bat on that product for a bit, because they were the first product to use Privy embedded wallets and actually like have traction, which I think like paved the way for more people to think about embedded wallets and like what they could be capable of. It was really easy to onboard. You could just connect with your Twitter, and you could like direct funds to this wallet, and then you just interact, and you didn't have to sign transactions. There was a lot about it that was innovative and good. It was just the first thing on Base that really took off. And I would make the argument that you could make a direct line from FriendTech to like Rodeo through certain patterns like the embedded wallets and building on Base and the progressive web app. Those all things today are like pretty common. And FriendTech was like pioneered a lot of this stuff. I would make that argument. The things that people didn't like about it was like, on the technical level, the protocol was non-upgradable and bonding curve was way too steep. So you hit a point where like 6 people bought keys to the channel, and suddenly everybody was like priced out. You couldn't buy another one. It would be like thousands of dollars to get a Kobe key or something. There was like a lot of like sniping going on where like as soon as I connected my personal X account, and I have like some, 1,000, like 20,000 followers or something. And like, as soon as I connected, like bots like realized, and then they just started buying up. So a lot of these like mechanics that were kind of like not that great about it. And it was very much just the crypto community. They didn't really like broaden out like any other types of creators. We took a 15% fee. And I think just a lot of these sort of like dynamics just made it something that didn't feel like it would stick around in its actual form. I think that people would probably comment that like the developers like made quite a lot of money and then just didn't have a good incentive to keep building the product. And like maybe they weren't really like in it for the long run to build a successful like consumer app. They just were doing something innovative and like, so you can make these arguments like in two ways, and that was like very polarizing for people. So that model I thought was interesting, and you got exclusive like access to a chat room or whatever if you like. So okay, it wasn't in ERC20, so people actually built like ERC20 wrappers around the keys in order to like trade them more efficiently on like Uniswap. Newer versions of this do it as ERC20s. Like you saw most recently, like launch, they launched a base and it's all ERC20s, and you can put like a developer's name into like as the creator. I think that's probably not a good pattern. So, there's like 20 like Jesse coins or whatever on launch, and they will like list him as the creator. And he's like supposed to like passively receive like funding through that model, but it's not a canonical like token for Jesse on that platform because there's 20 of them. And he's like the creator, like all of them, they all have the same name. So when thinking about this new protocol and, just prototype this thing, it was very obvious that, if you're going to say that this token is tied to a particular profile on the app, like there should only be one token for that profile. And so it's just mapped one-to-one with an Ethereum address. And so like you can't have like multiple tokens for like a given creator. And then also just like the fee sharing, like taking 15%, like on the FriendTech side, it was just like obviously like not very fair or like sustainable. And then the way that we do it is like the underlying account gets 30% of the tokens like over a year, which just makes it harder to kind of like somebody to come create an account, like, pump it and then like sell everything. And then the bonding curve is like quite a lot different. We actually, we have some like really great like mathematical engineers, like it's a very small team, there's like 3 of us, but they're like very great engineers. And so the curve that we make mathematically is like quite a good like innovation compared to, what you saw in like FriendTech, where it's just like a lot harder for a coin to kind of like have a big pump and graduate and stuff. So we're just trying to get away from like the super meme coin speculative thing and just trying to make something like really consistent. Like for me, the best case would be a creator comes on from Instagram, like outside of crypto. They're doing stuff on the platform, they're earning some reputation, and over time, very slowly over the course of like 6 months to a year, their like profile token, it just like, accumulates more value like very slowly. Because like people are putting in like $2 at a time, and like every time they post something cool, or whatever, it's like it adds to like their reputation on the system, and like and then you get to like $500 like market cap and like maybe 1,000. There's a good dynamic there that I think is healthy. And then like the thing that we just don't want to see is Kanye West, like, pick your celebrity, Joe Rogan or something, like goes and like, we're going to do this token. And then there's like this huge pump and dump, and then there's nothing sustainable about it. Like they're not like adding any content that is associated with the token over time. It was just like basically a one-off. That's like the worst case scenario. And if you were to like say one thing that has been bad about any like prior arts on this topic, it's been that it's too easy for people to just kind of get overexcited about the concept, put out a token, a couple of people make money, particularly like these professional like investors in like meme coin area who are like really well kitted out for doing this kind of thing, like sniping the coins early, pushing the price up and then dumping them on everyone else. Like you just want to avoid that like completely if possible. And you just want to make it so that like the median user on the platform is probably just making small amounts of money over time. It's not as exciting. Okay. So people like probably are not going to be like as excited about Stack as they were about Cloud, because it's just doesn't have this like massive dopamine rush. But if we can make it sustainable over time, then I think that there's probably something there that I want to explore. And then to the extent that we can like keep it, the token is really tied to like the creator's profile and not like the creator themselves. I think that that's an important thing too, because me coin symbolize it's this idea of like creating a stock market around people, which I'm a little bit skeptical of. But I do think that I've like Instagram had a thing where you could like invest in the underlying profiles. You can think of the creator as like an entrepreneur, like a still entrepreneur, and then their social media profile is like their business. And you're just kind of like investing in their like business idea. And their business idea might be, like a interior design, like, social media profile. It's like a business account on Instagram or whatever. And like, yeah, maybe you're like buying some investment into that and creates like a sort of like reputation, like marketplace for those profiles. Probably that makes sense to me. And that's probably like the direction that we're like trying to validate and like build up a little bit more and see how it goes. But yeah, I'm very like skeptical of meme coins. I don't think I've ever really bought a meme coin. Even though I've been in this industry like 8 years, I've bought many tokens, but I've never gone to like pumped up front and like bought like a moonshot coin. I can't get excited about it. So it's just very unlikely that I would like want to build a product around that kind of concept.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, to your point, like it might not be as exciting within a very narrow window of time as something that goes up, and people get their 100x and whatever. But meanwhile, as those people are getting their 100x, 100 people are lose all their money or whatever. So it's not as, thrilling maybe as that, for better or worse. But I do think like the thing that's going to have to happen to make one of these things work, whether it's a platform tied sort of personal token or just a generalized personal token, is that the platform has to survive with relevance and ideally not be quite as volatile. And it doesn't need to go like, straight up and to the right in a gradual way. It can be a little bumpy, but like in general, it needs to be kind of low and surviving, and ideally, getting more users and more activity and whatever in a slow way. And again, it doesn't need to be consistent, but at least like the trend needs to be that way. And that needs to be happening for long enough that these people or their profiles, whatever you want to call it, that are on it are genuinely having a like sort of improvement and growth over the period of time required to experience that growth, which is not like 3 days. It's, at least 3 months or more like 3 years. Like you can think of, how long does it take to get your first, 1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 followers on Twitter. I mean, I've been on Twitter for 5 years and I have like 5,000 followers, and I've been like pretty actively, doing stuff on the internet. So it's like, that's the sort of timeline I think that this thing would need to work across. And like, that's ultimately, I think, what the intention, I mean, that's the interesting part to me, at least, is being able to discover people who you're bullish on early on and actually, place a bet on them in a way that also helps them, because they're getting a percentage of the trading fees, or they're getting tokens of themselves when you buy tokens of them or whatever it is. And then it's sort of like, if they win in the long run, you win, and you also kind of help them win. And to me, that's like extremely interesting. And I think, it's like, it's the highest level possible thing, really, because you're dealing with people and their potential. Like that's, you're not like, even a company is, I mean, you could argue it both ways, I guess, but I would argue in some sense, a company is downstream of the founder. Someone like Elon, for example, has several companies. It's kind of dumb to bring up Elon in any example because he's such an extreme one, but think of any company, like that company is not necessarily the only company started by the founder. So you could bet on that founder, and, maybe you get sort of, they can win as a result of like multiple different ventures. And especially I think that could be interesting in a world where with crypto, it seems that people are, I mean, I don't know if this is going to change, but like you're seeing a lot more founders who are like doing things well, but trying multiple different products and companies at a faster speed than used to be typical, where you sort of like committed to something for like a very long time. And so if these people have like multiple products, multiple ventures, whatever it is, it's cool to just like sort of bet on the person. And I say you can make the other argument as well, though, because like companies, of course, are comprised of many people. So in a way, the people are downstream of the company in a way. But if we're talking about like sort of founder types, I think the argument that I made sort of like stands pretty well. And especially in a world in which the number of people required for a successful company is going lower and lower, and ultimately maybe we'll get to just like one person for, these really huge successful companies. So it's very interesting to me. That's why I say like earlier on, I think it's like probably the most disliked or hated thing in crypto? Like if you're going to talk about like the metas, at least like of the various things like DeFi, NFTs, meme coins. And this obviously hasn't gotten to like sort of quite the same level yet, but personal tokens, whatever you want to call them, people are over them. People have written them off, and I just think there's a ton of potential there. But again, to your point, it has to be done. Obviously something has to be done a little bit differently than what has been done prior, because they've all basically ended up being pump and dumps, regardless of, the founder's intentions. Like they may have had good intentions in some cases, they may have had bad intentions in some cases, but regardless, it's all been sort of similar results. So it'll be curious to see where it lands, and I'll definitely looking forward to seeing like what direction you guys decide to head with Stack. Do you think that as you sort of think through, do you have a sense as to whether, like, as you think through this concept, the more like sort of SaaS oriented tool will continue to fade more and more into like secondary relevance, or even just fade into the background as you continue to prioritize like a consumer experience? Or do you think the parallel sort of product could continue forward, or maybe you don't know yet?
At the moment we're just balancing the two. Like obviously we've done so much work like on the SaaS side, and it's like working pretty well. Like we have all these people using it, and they're pretty happy, and I want to continue to serve those people. But the market size isn't as big as I thought it would be. Like, when we kind of already had this idea, crypto is just quite small. There is only like 300 like projects that would like use this, or like, it's just like pretty capped, and it like takes a while to like have these conversations. Like, we have like a 3-month conversation with like OpenSea for like their policies or something. And it's like, just takes like a while.
It's like enterprise sales basically.
Yeah. And like in the meantime, like, me and my engineering team, like we just build things. So like we're kind of like, okay, we'll add all of the features, that are useful, and built out this like maximally cool like SaaS product. It's great. It's not literally like, we have like a review from like the founder of like Vercel saying like the API looks like great, and they're like, the SDK is cool. It's all there. Even like, as we explore the new era, we'll just see like what traction this gets. And we did get very good like early validation on this market feature. I think that it was probably confusing for some of like the workhouse crowd, who sort of like just saw like the early version, and then there was obviously like a couple $1 million being traded on like one week, and then they sort of discovered it. They were like, oh, a lot of people are like trading this thing, and like it like wasn't explained very well. So I think we need to clean all that stuff up if we really want this to be something that we like invest more into, and like we'll have to make a great like creator experience. Come on. Ideally not from inside crypto. Like we actually want to be market expansionary and say, all of the users who are most excited, I'll tell you this like very ironically, like it's like all of the users who are most excited about what we're doing are coming from TikTok and like Instagram, and they're like normal people, and they're like, okay, I kind of get it. Like I can be on this thing, I can interact with these people, I can like make friends on here. And then instead of them following me, they like pay a little bit to like be a holder. So it's like, if you want to say like hold is the new follower or something, and like instead of having your 5,000 followers on Twitter, like you have 5,000 holders that you like get over the course of time. Like they're pretty excited by it, and like they're into it. And then they're like, oh, I have this friend who would be great on here. And then they like go and tell their friend, and then the friend joins. Then they like go buy like $10 of that person, and they kind of find it funny and cool. And everybody is like, nobody is losing money. That's the thing that I'm most sensitive about is, the thing that I see that's so damaging to crypto is when you have a product that has like a pump and dump kind of vibe. The only people who make money are like the professional crypto people who are very good at doing like meme coin trading. And all like the real fans of, like the Barstool sports guy, all of they're entering into this sea of sharks, who are going to kind of like, in my eyes, it's like the thing that's going to give crypto a bad name. And like, so if you can just have the reverse of that happen, where like People are just doing small amounts, they're having fun, and like nobody's kind of using. That's what I'm seeing at the moment. So I'm happy with that. I don't know anybody who's like actually lost money on the platform, which is nice. A lot of people are, like from tens of dollars to like a couple $1,000s, which is, yeah, that's kind of like the promise of like using a platform like this is, it's like regular social, but there is like a financialized, like with like a better monetization like model, that doesn't rely on ads. And if that works, then I'm pretty happy with that. And we'll see if like this good like retention and like referral kind of behavior going on. But it's looking very promising at the moment. It's a nice community and people are connecting with each other and like commenting on each other's things. Quite cool.
Is there a type of content that you guys are seeing like mostly with these creators that are on the platform? Is it like, videos, like TikTok style stuff, or Instagram photos, or writing, or whatever? Is combination is not particularly power law on any one particular content type?
Yeah. So it's kind of funny, like this, this is like a 2-week-old like thing. But like when we first launched it, because the traffic that was coming was originally just like from the crypto area, a lot of people were trying to do these like NFT like posts, So they post something that like type of thing that they're post on Dharma or Rodeo. And It was like, this is like my interpretation of like fine art, and they put it out, and it's like some like glitch art thing, which is cool. And like people liked it, but we actually saw a lot more engagement when people just put more like personal stuff. So they like connect with, like IG or like TikTok or something, and they just post like, here's me skateboarding and wiping out. And then everybody like loved that, drew a picture and it's like a little sketch, but it's a photo of a sketch. It's not like a productionized like artwork. And then they're just sharing like, this is my process, and then people like that and they start commenting. So I think like a lot of the engagement has been, very different to what you see on like NFT minting platforms. And it's more like what you see on Web2 social, which is actually just people want to connect with each other and they want to learn more about who the person is. And then sometimes they like the content so much that they're like, yeah, you know what? I want to like follow this person. And I also want to like $5. Like when I follow them, I want to like buy it. And it's like, it's just kind of like a nice thing. That's what we're seeing. Very happy with that. I think it's very different, from like other sort of like crypto platforms where like the monetization stuff requires this really high barrier of entry, which is that you have to upload like some kind of fine art thing, which is just very hard for people to do. Like how many people are like professional digital artists versus just people who want to like make friends online. Yeah, like you definitely have this situation where like every now and then somebody will come on and the other people who are engaged in the community and like they're checking out like every couple of hours, they like will see that person has a lot of potential. So they will like buy like $5 of that person's profile early. And then that person will just continue to post like bangers, and then like other people will discover them. And then that person's market cap will get to like $400, $500. And that early person is just up, and it's just nice. So it's kind of the dynamic that we're seeing. I'm pretty stoked how that's going.
Do you have a sense of where these people are coming from? Because it's like, it's actually kind of surprising to hear that it's not mostly like a lot of crypto people, just because the people who tend to find out about these apps are generally kind of coming from like the same places, whether it's like, crypto Twitter or Warpcast. So somehow you're getting people from like Instagram and TikTok more than those crypto folks.
Yeah. So it's kind of being passed around from friend to friend more, like organic. I'm actually only worried about like the crypto people who are coming in. To be honest, it's like whenever I see crypto people coming in, like sometimes I'm seeing like impersonation where somebody signs up and they call themselves like Dollar Tree Trump or whatever, and it's like a crypto person who's trying to create like chaos on the platform, or like they're uploading some like very like low quality like art thing that they think is like into, or like they think that that's what the platform wants, or they're just kind of being weird where like they come and it's like that kind of thing is just like still kind of grifty. I'm actually already seeing that from people who are like connecting wallets and they're like from like the crypto side, and I think that's because crypto has unfortunately. And then everything I've seen that's like quite good and cool it's basically because I've like told like a normie friend of mine who works like for like a finance company in New York or something, like, hey, do you want to try post this? And they're like, okay, I'll post my food photos and like review of like restaurants in New York or something. They post that, and then they're like, okay, I'm gonna like tell my friend about it. Then they post, and it's sort of like growing in this like little circle of people. So like in New York or whatever, are like they're going to like restaurants to shop with each other, and then they're sharing the app. And they're like, oh, I'm kind of crypto curious. I'll like try this out and see what it's like. And that's sort of like how it's slowly building. And then there are like some very crypto newbie people who have found out about it through either like some NFT mint or something on Coin. Then they've figured it out, and then they figured out that they can be a person on here and just like share their like normal life. And then they can bet on other people as they join the app, and they like make some money. And they're not like, it's and they sell a little bit and then into like other profiles. To the extent which that continues to happen and like you can organically grow that way, I'd be very excited. And then my biggest concern is sort of crypto grifter type people coming in and like trying to cause like chaos. So yeah, if the platform ends up being something more like Instagram, but instead of following, you like pay a little bit and you get like, you can only see their like Instagram like type stories or something like that if you're a holder. If that's cool and that works and it's like healthy behavior and like nobody's losing money and the content is like wholesome, then I think that would be successful and I'd want to like keep building that. If it becomes impossible to do that because somebody comes with like $1 million in ETH and just tries to like pump and dump like link profiles, I'm going to have to like rethink like how we do onboarding or something.
Right. No, that makes sense. And I think that approach, like, I mean, that organic sort of spread is probably ideal, at least for the early days, as you guys are experimenting with things and getting like non-crypto people involved, which is pretty rare for crypto apps. It seems like it's sort of like a good, some sort of like good precursors for what you guys are trying to do. And just that organic spread among like normal people is probably like a really good way to start. And you'll probably get some like interesting feedback from them that would be quite different from crypto natives who have like sort of some different things that they're looking for, namely a lot of them to just like make money really fast or something. Last question, zooming out a bit, more generally than just Stack or this space that we've been talking about, just having been building in crypto for as long as you have across numerous cycles. I've been open-minded to the idea that, everyone kind of assumes that we have like these cycles where there's a year or two sort of bull market followed by, 2 or 3 years of a bear market, and it sort of repeats over and over again because that's sort of been the history for the last several years. But I don't think that's inevitable that sort of needs to be the case. Certainly not in perpetuity, but I'm sort of open-minded to the idea that might not happen again. I'm assuming that it will, but like just by the natural, if you have something that's going to get extremely popular or valuable, it's not sensible that would happen in a straight line. It's going to happen in like these sort of bursts and then crashes, and then each, crash is a little bit higher than, or a lot of bit higher than the previous one. And it's sort of like built like that volatilely over time, sort of like the Bitcoin chart or whatever. But I don't know that necessarily needs to continue for everything for that long, but just sort of taking it for granted that is sort of what's going on and that we're somewhere in the middle of some like bullish cycle right now. People are like, meme coins just crashed as we're recording this, and, people are, Ethereum's crashed a fair amount and, whatever. Do you have like sort of a high level perspective on, how crypto as a whole is sort of developing, whether it's in line with some of your expectations or maybe disappointing or surprising in certain ways versus, maybe 4 years ago or even prior to that when you were just getting started?
Yeah. Wow. It's such a loaded topic, and like I think I have so many thoughts about it. So it's like hard to kind of like give a summary. You know, it's like a lot of questions there, but in general, I saw this chart from Chris Dixon presenting at the A16Z crypto, that like little summit thing that they do with like they incubate some startups. And he was making the point that it does have this like tendency to have these cycles every 4 years, and then people kind of stick around it. So there's this pattern of like can get this like big cycle, and like everybody's excited about it. There's a bull market, and then it drops up, and like you retain like 15% of the people or something like that, and then like 3 4 years, it just kind of grows over time. That just indirectly seems like what has been happening. Within crypto, then you also get other apps that have their own cycles that sort of counterbalance that to some extent. So an example would be Polymarket, where every time there's like an election cycle, it has its own little like bull market, and like everybody comes onto Polymarket, and like every year it gets a little bit bigger, and then the next election cycle, there's more, and then you get some like sports betting stuff happening there too. So the more apps there are that have their own like independent cycles, it will start to flatten out that like up dramatic. Those like peak to trough like cycles are every 4 years.
Right.
So yeah, I think that happens. Within apps, and then like just generally, Web2 doesn't seem to have the same kind of thing. I think it's because it doesn't have market cycles like attached to it. Like a SaaS company is like pretty stable like over time, with exceptions like the pandemic or something, but it's a lot more stable, and crypto just happens to be tied to a kind of financial market cycle that seems to sort of peak every 4 years. In terms of, am I like disappointed or like excited in the space? Like from when I started, I read the Ethereum white paper like pretty late, like 2016 or something. And it was like, okay, you have this like global shared computer space. I did not think it would scale. And I remember telling everybody, that I was like working with at the time when I was consulting at Numeri, like, to the extent that I'm like a software engineer myself, like I just don't see how this like will scale. And, but I sort of, allow myself to just, sort of bypass my like disbelief for a second, and just sort of say, well, if it did scale, it would be kind of interesting, because then you could have a lot of interoperability, and you could have like native payments like on this thing. It could be quite cool. I didn't know anything about ZK, like zero knowledge proofs at the time, which I think once I figured that trick out, I realized, okay, there probably is a way to make these like little like mini networks that can communicate with zero knowledge proofs, and maybe that works out. And that's been like very exciting. So I think like I've gotten like more bullish over time, and then I stopped paying attention to the market cycles. I actually, when I worked in like the more finance oriented parts of crypto, like when I was working on the wallet, on Dharma, like I was so cued in, and I just have like really good intuition for like where the market is. And I think everybody who's been in this long enough kind of like has this spidey sense of like, this feels like it's too bullish or like it's too bearish, and you like trade on that. But the last couple of years, I've just been completely detached from that, and I don't feel it at all. I'm just like not paying attention. So when you say that meme coins are dying, it's like I didn't even notice that. I'm just working on my thing. I'm connecting with people. I'm watching cool like technology that people are putting out around like ZK stuff and like different like networks. I'm aware that there's like a lot of grift and stuff in this space, and I'm like, I think that that's like the most unfortunate part of it. Obviously, like regulatory wise, administration is like very favorable towards crypto, and that's going to be a big tailwind. And you have like stable coins working and all that. So in general, I'm like pretty optimistic about everything. And like, yeah, maybe it feels like, for people coming in from like 2021, maybe this feels like kind of disappointing. But I see things like growing slowly over time. I think it will compound. So I'm pretty optimistic about it.
Yeah, I think builders like you are probably more rare than in that you're not hyper attached to what's going on, where we're at in the cycle, what's happening in the markets. And I think there's I sort of go both ways on it, because on the one hand, I think there's probably, if you're paying attention to where things are, it might help inform timing of certain things, like for the products that you're working on and launches and whatnot. But that's like sort of, and, timing is super important. But, it's sort of just that is kind of one piece. And is it worth sacrificing for that piece your sort of ability to commit and sort of stay determined over a long period of time on a certain path that you're committed to building along? And like, I don't know, like maybe if you just stay, like Polymarket, as you mentioned, is actually a good example, I think, where like their cycle was completely independent of like any other cycles. Like they just sort of built their product over a long period of time. And when the election came, they were ready. And it didn't matter what the rest of the market was doing because they built a great product for something that was sort of independent from, it didn't really need the price of Bitcoin, for example, to be like really high at the time. I think, consequently, like it actually was, like Bitcoin was coming off of like a, pretty good up year or something like this past election, but like it didn't have like that wasn't really that important. The important part was like we had this new tool that was able to predict the election, looking back far better than any of the polls. And this was kind of like the first year, at least with like a US presidential election, where that was seen like at scale. Like I remember thinking going into the election, like it seems like this would be a better predictor. And the polls all have this at 50-50, but Polymarket's got it at like, 65-35 or 70-30 or whatever it is. And, it seems like Polymarket would be sort of, more right here, but we really like, you can't really say for sure. Cause for all, like the people participating just happen to be like really right leaning on average or something. And it's just not reflective of the population. And so it ends up being like really wrong, even though it is like a genuine market. But then, I was sort of relieved to see at the election, like that wasn't the case at all. Like it was completely on point. And that was just kind of cool to see, like, this is just a genuinely better predictor. And if we can predict the election, what else can this be useful for? And I'm sure they'll sort of like, you mentioned like sports betting could be happening on there, but that's, there's existing, sports betting kind of works already. So I'm sort of thinking that, I sort of tend to think that Polymarket will find other things outside of sports betting but also in addition to sort of like election type stuff that will sort of become their bread and butter, and they can like definitely build some interesting things. So anyway, like I think that's a good example of, you can completely ignore the markets, build something that you think is interesting and valuable, and like it can work completely independent of trying to time things perfectly or whatever. And I do just, I think, as well as me, I think it's hard to be building in crypto and be on Twitter and whatever, and to ignore things to a large degree. So I think it's pretty unusual, but it's cool to hear that that's sort of your approach, and excited to see where that takes you.
You also got to like be aware of the shifting goalposts that is inherent in like anything that people get like excited about on the technology front. So for example, with AI, passing the Turing test was this like amazing goal that, was like the queen in the eye of like Alan Turing in like 1912 or 1920 or something. But, and like we achieved it now. But now people are like, accept that like, it makes like, errors in like React code or something like that. And like, people avoid like, they get comfortable with like the status quo like very quickly and then just move on to like, what's the next goal? Crypto is exactly the same. Like, it's, Polymarket, I remember when Augur was like being built and I read the white paper and it was like, it was cool, but it was so complex and nobody knew if it would work. And like Polymarket works great. And like the election, it like really did prove itself. And then that people are like, oh, but why is it on Polygon or something? There's like the fact that like we do hit the goalposts. It's important just to like recognize, and stablecoin like volume being high, it's a really good thing. And L2s like, proof of stake actually working, and like the L2s existing, and like having really cheap transaction fees, like all of this stuff would have been so amazing if you told me like 3-4 years ago that we'll get to a point where transactions are like practically free or like 1 cent per transaction. They're online all the time. Coinbase has their own like L2 that they're using. Yeah, even if they had told me that like Compound had $10 billion in it, like 4 years ago, I would have been like, or like, 6 years ago, whenever they were starting, like that would have been amazing because that's like, like that just proves that it can like hold value or something. And then it goes up to like, holding like billions of dollars. Like that's incredible. And we shouldn't lose sight of these like amazing like achievements that have happened in crypto. Same with AI, right? So easy to just like move the goalposts out and then feel like no progress is being made, even though like tremendous progress is being made.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I generally think like the more you zoom out, with what's going on in crypto, the more it's easy to identify those sort of like big things that we've quickly come to take for granted that have happened, every few months or whatever sort of the timeline is. Like that we've had these large milestones that were celebrated quickly and then forgotten more quickly. And like, the industry definitely does feel like it's moving forward, quite a lot. I know I'm very, I would say overall, I'm very positively surprised, with sort of like, I don't know about very, but I'm positively surprised with like having sort of gotten into crypto around like 2017, and having these ideas around like what this could be one day, maybe like sort of in decades. It's now like 7 or 8 years later, and some of those things have already happened.
Yeah.
And so like it's not as quick as you might want it in terms of like, month to month, year to year, but the fact that all of these things have happened within 10 years when I sort of thought it was like a decades long thing. And I still, honestly, I think a lot of it should be, I mean, it's so hard to predict like the future out very far now. You have people talking about like, what AI is going to look like in 2 years. And it's like these crazy concepts, but, I don't know, generally speaking, like I still think crypto is like a multi-decade sort of, adoption, and so far it's exceeded expectations, I would say, in terms of the speed and sort of various milestones.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, under very like constrained circumstances as well, like very in like a difficult time to even get like banking licenses to do like some of these things, like regulatory clarity and stuff. Like trying to do like a real estate business like on chain is like really hard, even though that's a great idea and like it will happen. It's just to get the kind of legal clarity to get.
Yeah. So, I mean, on that point, it should be, given that a lot of the world sort of follows the US's lead, obviously not all of the world, but a lot of the world kind of follows the US's lead on policy and regulation and stuff. Given the favorable administration right now, it should be an interesting 4 years to come. So anyway, appreciate all the time. I know we've gone way over, but interesting conversation. Looking forward to following along with what you guys are building over at Stack, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Jordan. See you.
Thank you.